First of all, I want to thank everybody who's still here. We've been talking, our panel's been talking all day saying, is there anybody going to be here when we get up there? So thanks very much. The only thing that was saving us was the cocktail hour that's coming after us. So we know that. But that's why somebody in this room after our panel is going to win a trip to Las Vegas. So you all deserve that chance. But as Skip was saying, and he said it so well, one of the most important things is supporting each other. You know, and the whole premise of this day, you know, this is the Asian American Business Roundtable, but we're all here together, and we all have a common cause. And without each other, we don't have anything. We're not going to have enough power. So if there's anything that I've heard throughout this day, is our ability to support each other and raise each other up. Not take anybody down, not wonder why that person got a chance and not you. Do everything you can, because if you support each other, everybody will do well. Us as executive search firms, you know, one of the most important things we do when we're recruiting people is sourcing candidates. And not in fact, there's nobody else who's like a managing partner of a top 10 search firm than two of the people up here right now. So there's going to be a lot of people that really don't know your community. So as they call you and they'll ask you, who else could you recommend? Do your best and give them the correct names of people that you know, people who you would think were good candidates. Not that they're going to take your spot, but they're going to go and get an opportunity, hopefully. And I'll be honest with you, we're looking at community leaders. I call somebody up and I ask them, could you recommend anybody else in your community? And they go, oh no, I don't know anybody else. Well, what does that tell me about that individual? So please, you know, I think it's one of the most important messages of the day is that we cannot expect corporations and CEOs and to pick people from our community if we're not going to help each other. So, you know, let's keep that in mind. So one of the things that we want to do today in our panel is to make sure that we kind of draw upon the different things that we've talked about throughout the day, things that we've heard today, and we're going to kind of crystallize it into our panel. And so as you ask your questions or you hear what we're saying up here, please think about it in context of other things that have been said today, and let's try and bring it all to life, okay? So we'll start down at the other end. Larry Woodard and I are friends from our Leo Burnett days, and Larry, we have two people who've served on boards up here, and two people who come from the search firm world. So we're going to have two completely different viewpoints. So Larry, why don't you take a couple minutes and talk about your road to the board?
Thanks, Glenn. First of all, I need to make sure that you guys know that I'm a pragmatist, and I always have been one, and that's why I believe that I've been successful in business. I'll give you an example, and then I'll answer the question as quickly as I can. When I went to work for Leo Burnett, I ran an agency called Vigilante here in New York. And so we're an agency that's a small agency, and they're a large agency. And so the board would have me come and present to them, and when I presented to them, they would be asking me what I was going to bring, how much money I was going to make. I was reading Ad Age one day, and it said that in the Leo Burnett network of agencies, that they had 75% of all the media buying in the United States, and almost 65% in the world. So it occurred to me that they could probably give me more than I could give them. So when I went to present for them for the first time, I said, well, I'm going to deliver $3 million to EBITDA. I'm going to deliver $10.6 million in revenue if you deliver me $15 million in revenue. So I listed all the clients that they had that they could get to me, and I told them that what I was going to do. Within 4 months, I had done what I was going to do, and they hadn't done anything. And that sort of set the stage for our relationship. And I'm saying that because that's exactly the way that I feel about this enterprise that we're undergoing right now. The fact of the matter is that I have a friend named Glegg Watson who wrote the seminal book, Black Life in Corporate America. And Glegg said that diversity and discrimination will become an issue when it becomes the white man's issue, not our issue, because we're on the outside looking in. And I agree with him in a lot of ways. So all across America, boards, not just the Fortune 500 boards, not just the Fortune 1000 boards, but pretty much all boards, are peopled with people who don't look like the people in this room. And for the most part, they don't care. When I got on the board that I'm on, the corporate board that I'm on, ISC, NASCAR, I realized after being on the board for 3 years that nobody on that board cares or cared if there was an African American or a Hispanic or a woman on the board. That what made them have to do it was unbelievable. Everybody would walk up to me and say, I caused them to get you on the board, or I was responsible for getting you on the board. And they all were. There was so much pressure on them. Their largest institutional investor pressed them. Their suppliers pressed them. The media pressed them. Everybody pressed them before they made the move. That's how much energy it took to get one person on the board. So the fact of the matter is that now as I tell you the story of how I got on the board, the real story is I didn't do anything to get on the board. The fact is that the work of a lot of other people, the very hard work of other people, made it necessary. Certainly I was prepared, as many of you are. But the fact of the matter is, and it was said in an earlier panel, it was my preparation, and all my hard work that equaled luck in the end. But in a lot of ways, I've always been board ready. I was born board ready. I'm an Air Force brat that went to 11 different schools going to school, mostly in Europe. I speak 5 languages. I've always networked. I've always volunteered. I've always collaborated. I've always shared my skill sets. I've always been an advocate. That's the way you get along when you're showing up to a school for the first time and nobody knows you. You don't want to get beat up every day. You learn that very, very, very quickly. And so those are things that I could always do. But my first break that turned into me getting on the ISC board, I've been on the board for 6 years, was when I met Dave Bing. So for those of you who don't know, Dave Bing was the mayor of Detroit. He was he's a Hall of Famer basketball player. He's one of the most illustrious alumni that went to my school, Syracuse University. And Dave Bing is just an all-around great guy. He's got integrity for days. So Dave met me when I was 19, and he decided that he was going to mentor me. I didn't decide that he was going to mentor me. He decided that he was going to mentor me. Gave me a ticket, bought me out. At the time, Dave owned the largest African-American-owned or minority-owned company in the United States. He had 7,000 employees in a steel company. And he just decided that he was going to mentor me, and he mentored me. He gave Syracuse University over that period of time about $25 million. And when they asked him for some more money, he said, wait a minute. And he started asking for things back. And one of the things that he asked for back is he said, I need for somebody to be on the board. And so they said, well, we don't have anybody board ready. And he said, oh, that's okay. Put Larry on the board. I was 26 years old. I stayed on the board for 19 years. Dave did that. So when I was being vetted for boards and they went out, and I had been on all these boards, and I had been on the board of Syracuse, and they were singing my praises, and they said, well, he did all that. How long has he been on the board? And they said 19 years. And it was one of the things that made the difference to me getting on a corporate board. So, I'll say in summation that the idea is the preparation that everybody's talked about before. It's all the things that people have said to you before. But at the end of the day, it's the networking. It's people knowing you. Just to end this story, because I have a beautiful comment to make that you guys will all love. I was put on the board of ISC, of NASCAR, by a guy who was my enemy. So when I was working for General Motors and he was the CMO, he sent a letter because he was asked to thin out the herd. And he said, you're fired. It was 2 days before Christmas. They're 70% of our income, and they fired us as an ad agency. I got on a plane. I flew to the Ren Center in Detroit. I checked into the hotel. I told my employees I'm going to stay in the hotel until I get an audience. So I waited for Brent Dewar to, give me an audience, and I waited for a week, I waited for 2 weeks, I waited for 3 weeks, and each day I would write him a letter. And I finally wrote him a letter saying, listen, we've been one of your most effective agencies. If you need to lighten the load, make sure you don't throw out something out of the boat that you may need at some point. That got to him. He said, I'll have a meeting with you. He had a meeting with me, and he said, well, I'll tell you what, it wasn't popular to get rid of you guys. I'm not going to be the CMO for very much longer anyway, so I'll give you this little small assignment. But he fired me. And then, years later, when he was the president of NASCAR, they asked him, for a board member that may be somebody diverse. He brought up my name. I got on the board. Isn't karma wonderful?
Great story. Dwain, Larry touched on it. Do companies really care?
Unfortunately, when you think about the swath of American companies, they're public, family-owned, private equity, et cetera, of all sorts of sizes, we're preaching to the converted in this room. Most of the work that we do to have an audience that would be appreciative of a more diverse slate are people who either don't know or don't care. So it's an educational process to share that if we provide you a diverse slate, that will be a great slate of top talent in addition to what you would normally expect, but we'll have some great talent outside of that. And I've been able to successfully place about 70% of my candidates are diverse. And it's not because they are pulling diverse talent, it's because I'm offering diverse talent. So a broader piece to your question is, well, why doesn't that happen more? And that's because it's a numbers game. I work at the senior most level of organizations, and when you think about those senior titles, there are many more majority males available. So our industry can place from that pool a pool of 5 really good, talented executives. It takes a little bit more effort to look for people like the people in this room and to find people that you know. And we're rewarded because, as a colleague says, it's a little bit tougher to get to those levels when you look like people in this room. So therefore, in many instances, you're better. So by finding diverse leadership talent, I'm actually finding the best talent. And I can find non-diverse people that are very good. But what happens is you are so much, many times so much better than the pool. You rise to the top, you get to the finals, and many times get selected. But the starting point is most organizational structures really don't care. 350 companies are in the organization Skip referenced recently, but there are many, many companies out there that need boards, have great talent, and may be heavily populated with employee population. So it's not overwhelmingly a pull from the marketplace. It's a push by those of us in the industry.
Fernando, you're a seasoned veteran of serving on boards. What was your road to the board seat?
Must be the white hair that gave it away. It was an accident that did it. I spent the bulk of all of my professional life in public service, in government and politics. Joined a think tank as its president for a while, and then recruited by a predecessor of mine as borough president of the Bronx, who was on a bank board, Bob Abrams, who went on to become Attorney General after he was borough president of New York. Recruited me to the board. I happened to know the CEO. By the way, that's the key. When they talk about the right fit or chemistry or anything else, there's nothing like knowing the CEO. And it turns out I was. Why? Because we sort of spoke the same language. This was a small bank. It's not small anymore, 30 billion plus now. It was a small bank, niche clients, people, right smack dab in the New York market. So what were they looking for? I didn't really have a deep understanding of it, but we talk about it in the Bronx where I born, raised, and grew up all the time. What do you bring to the party? What value do you add? In politics, what utility do you have? It's all the same thing, same difference. Do you understand their customers? Do you understand how they should be responding to them? Everybody's going to have D&I issues. Do you see how that goes? In a bank, there are some unique challenges. Special banking laws passed, especially since 9/11, Bank Secrecy Act, Anti-Money Laundering Act. You better understand that. And when you see people come through it, you need to separate out who is legitimately trying to withdraw $9,000 from his or her business account, and do it well and legitimately and with a purpose, and who's trying to launder money. And it takes judgment to get that straight. It takes judgment to make a loan that's good. A lot of people, in fact, some of my colleagues on I replaced a member of the board that I joined who died at 93. At 52, when I joined, I was the youngest by about 30, 35 years. Gave you an indication of what it was all about. And they had lost touch with who their customers were. Customers come in all shapes, sizes, and flavors, languages and ethnicities. And they needed to do better with their customers. They needed to do better with their market. They need to improve their position in the market. And that's what you bring to the party. That's how you get on a board, apparently, but that's how you stay on a board. I've been on that board since 2002, through mergers, acquisitions, and changes in the industry. Our biggest challenge now is, and we're getting out of that, thank God, the loans we made in the medallion taxi industry. There was a time when those medallions were worth, trading on the market, $1.2 million. Now, they're a little more than a tenth of that. And I don't think the market has found a bottom yet. Because of Lyft and Uber and all of the other things that are going on that have already revolutionized that industry. So it's all of those things that add to your portfolio, what you bring to the party, as we say in the Bronx. And something else. What I do now with my life, at least lately, and some of you know that already, is I'm the acting chairman and CEO of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, the MTA. Those of you who swipe a Metro card, for only 2 more years, because we're changing that, will know what that enterprise, it's a $17 billion enterprise with an over $30 billion construction budget. It's huge. 73,000 people work for us in all of our agencies, and the MTA is the holding company of all of those enterprises, separate enterprises, subways, buses, bridges and tunnels, commuter rail. We even have our own construction company. And in that, a deep understanding of diversity and inclusion is essential to what we do, because we do business. In fact, we're one of the biggest partners of doing business in the state of New York. We're the ones who help small contractors who have been used to subcontracting become very big players in the market. Those two are things that help you with your responsibilities on a board. So my bottom line is, look, and I'm on corporate governance and nomination committee on our bank board, and that's great. But they don't recruit you. It's a personal contact. And with all due respect to search firms, you know, they have a list of people or kinds of things they're looking for when they go out, but that's not it. Something's got to click. If you find that thing that clicks, that value you add, that thing you bring to the party, as we say to the Bronx, then that could be the beginning of a very beautiful and long-term relationship.
Okay, no need for search firms. That'll be Fernando's last question of the day, so I hope you enjoyed listening to him. So much for this session. Camille, what are some of the common misconceptions about board director selection that new majority candidates should be aware of?
That's a great question. Just in a little bit of response to Fernando, you know, I do feel like it's a recruiter's job, especially those at Ferguson Partners and FPL, where we do service the board recruitment space. It's a social responsibility to play your part as a change agent in bringing more diverse candidates to the table, and not just bringing a more diverse slate to the table, but ensuring placement. And so I would say over the past year, in terms of, you know, our board work where we serve, primarily in the real estate space, because that is the history of Ferguson Partners. About 3 years ago, we did 30 board searches. About a year ago, we went to 70. And it's growing. And so what that is saying to me is you have a growing presence of retained search within this space. Now, we certainly aren't touching everything, and it is so important to network and, of course, know the CEO. But you're seeing more and more recruiters in this space. And so when I think about...
Keep going, Camille. You're on a roll.
So when I think about that, in the vantage point that I have, and you know, it is limited, and I will say, you know, with full transparency, where we're really knocking the door at Ferguson Partners is on gender diversity in the boardroom. That's where we're getting most of our traction, and certainly it's not enough, and we can do more. But that's my limited vantage point. And what I would say from board members or first-time board members, anybody who wants to be on a board, a couple of lessons that we've learned at Ferguson, and I've certainly learned. One is, and I believe there was a panelist earlier who said this idea of be unapologetic. And I think that's incredibly important in terms of positioning yourself as a potential board member. I think a lot of first-time board members feel like they need to explain why they haven't been on a board yet or why they're a first-time board member. And so you almost in that very first interactions of your interview, you start positioning yourself as someone who is defensive, right, or needs to explain away some sort of lacked competency. And I would say, look, if we're looking at you know, baseball as an illustration, the tie goes to the runner, in my opinion, right? So you're already qualified. You've had a headwind being part of the new majority. So on paper, you're just as good, but also you've been facing this headwind all your career, and so you are qualified, right? So don't explain away the fact that you are a first-time board member. That's my job as a recruiter, to help bridge that potential lingering question that the board might have. The other thing I would say is, it's not a traditional job interview. And I think in a traditional job interview, and I've done this before in the past, is you want to outline all of your accomplishments and say, I've done it, I've arrived, I can do this, you can trust me, I'm capable. And you're actually interviewing for a different job than you would in any other company. What you're doing is trying to position yourself as having something that you're bringing to the party, but bringing to the party as a strategic advisor, right? So what can you bring to help the company and help the board achieve its strategic objectives? So when you think about all of your accomplishment and your experience, how do you reposition it as a strategic advisor to the business? And how have you done that in the past? Because that's the role that you're actually interviewing for. So that's my take on it. Thanks.
Good. I like that. Is there any data to suggest a more diverse board is more effective?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of data. McKinsey did a study that's often quoted about really double-digit improvements, return on assets, return on invested capital, and most of the key metrics. I think our challenge is still to educate the marketplace that that does exist, because it's not, again, common knowledge outside of people who are interested in D&I. And many of the people who are in the decision-making capacity perhaps have not invested the time to learn about the impact. And I think the real story is that we're doing it not because it's a nice thing to do, but because it has a very favorable impact on the business. And I think that data really reinforces that.
What do you think is the biggest barrier, and this is for anybody, biggest barrier that's holding people back from opportunities?
I'm going to take a little bit of a shot at that because I really want to, because you guys have stayed and been so wonderful, I want to make sure that I give specifically, the Asian folks in the audience a specific answer about being Asian and wanting to be on a board. So my company is extremely diverse. We've got pretty much everything. In a company that has just over 100 people, we speak 17 languages. That's 17 native languages. Probably there are people who speak more than that. But we have enclaves of everything, and so I'm able to look at behavior over the years. And the average tenure of somebody who works for me is actually 12 years. So I've known some of these people for a very, very long time. So my white employees, my Caucasian employees, within the first 2 or 3 weeks of being hired, find their way into my office. Because they know this from their parents and their parents' parents. They find their way into my office. They tell me all about themselves. They share with what they know how to do. They tell me all their special skills, and they're there. And they use every opportunity to do extra credit work, extracurricular work, trying to make themselves. And within 2 years, if I don't promote them, they're gone, right? But they just want to let me know right away, we want to be your partner. We want to do this with you. And I can talk about every other group, but I want to talk specifically about my Asian employees. Fabulous. George Yoon, all fabulous. They go to their offices, they come to work, they work hard, they're extremely competent, and I never hear from them, ever. I'm supposed to watch and see their competency, notice how great they are, find them, and promote them. What they do is they're very, very good, and they're very, very quiet. George and his cohorts would never, ever come into my office unannounced. They would never come unbidden. They would never write me a note telling me all the wonderful things that they do. They would never do any of that stuff. In board work, that's working against you. You've got to be seen. You have to network. You have to know people. You have to be connected. You have to. So one piece of information that you need to know, and that is that, you have to overcome some of the things that are inherent in the way that you do things in this, to be able to get noticed and to make it be known that not only do you want to be noticed, but you want to be rewarded for that being noticed as well.
Related to that, much of the board work, despite being a recruiter, is not done by third parties. And my phrase for you is, it's not who we know, it's who knows you. So who knows you is really a form of networking. I think Ms. Liu mentioned she was an avid networker. If there's one thing that I say that would be of value and action for you, is to network, particularly with people who are senior to you. Networking with your peers and junior to you is of no value professionally from my standpoint. If you're trying to elevate your career, you want to network only, if you take my total away, people above you. 1 level, 2 levels, doesn't matter, but those are the people you want to focus on. Those are the people you want to have aware of you as a professional and what you're trying to do and the value you've added in your career.
Fernando, anything to add?
Well, networking is important. That's an absolute fact. And I think the point that was just made about how you are, if you are known, extends to how you are known. If you are known as someone of good judgment, of good character, somebody who can bring something to the party, people are paying attention. And it's that reputation that's going to be an additive for you. That's the thing that you personally bring to the party.
Camille, anything to add?
I would say, since you're networking and since recruiters are in this space more and more, network with the recruiter too. So it used to be that you would never take the headhunter's call. And I think some of that evolution is changing. And so, yes, the recruiter can also be an ally for you. So get your name out there and know the recruiters as well.
Do you think, as far as board selection, what's more important, to be the new majority person who represents the new majority and everything that they're all about and embraces their communities, or is it going to be the person who kind of assimilates onto the board and is just another person on the board espousing the same viewpoints of the people on the board?
Can I take a piece of that?
Yes.
It's not only understanding how your cultural fit may work, but it's also understanding what opportunities you present by being on the board for your colleagues and for your corporation. If you represent opportunities to enter new markets, to understand them better, to understand clients better, to understand customers better, to understand how to deal with customers better, that's a very big deal.
I can certainly give my perspective on that. I think when you think about the old generation of boards, it was a bunch of people who all thought very similar to one another, very homogenous, who sat around, maybe had lunch maybe 4 times a year and got a paycheck out of it. That is not the way that we are seeing boards in terms of the boards that we built and the placements that we make, and it's certainly not the board of the future. Board members have an incredible responsibility to the company, to shareholders, and to employees, to be present and have an opinion and have a perspective and contribute at the board table. Also, and here's, we're talking about stereotypes and we're talking about this aspect of if you are on the board and you're the first one of your kind on the board, in whatever demographic that may mean, in many ways you will be a representative of that group. And so if you're sitting at the board and you're not speaking and you're just assimilating, it's going to unfortunately give the assumption to other board members that you speak for your group, right, in some way. And so that is just not the position that you want to be in.
That's interesting. I was, as some of you have read my bio, I was the first Asian American to be a board member in professional sports in this country. And, as my peers on the board looked at me as being very Asian, my community, I don't think, thought I was like the most Asian person. I don't know why. Okay. But I didn't spend a lot of time. I spent more corporate time than, being a community leader or things like that. And I've decided I've been intentional to add that to my resume. But at the time, going on the board, I didn't have a lot of community-based involvement, so people would think that, why did I get that opportunity? But, I think at the end of the day, I think the most important thing is to have the ability to serve. Then once you have that opportunity, then to go ahead and create whatever change that you can by being there.
And Glenn, it's very counterintuitive, because most of us, in order to get ahead in our professions, we live in the United States after all, we have assimilated to some degree, and we do those things that we do. And particularly when you get to that level where you've been a CEO and a lot of boards are culled from that group of people, you are a certain kind of person with a certain kind of skill set, and you actually do have a lot in common with the people who you're on the board with. The most difficult and the bravest thing in the world is to be sitting in a board room and to actually have to go against the grain. all the guys who are on the boards with you, a lot of these guys have been on for years and years and years. They're eloquent. I sit on a board and 3 of the 5 outside directors are billionaires. So these are guys who are billionaires. I mean, I sit on a board with Edsel Ford III. His great-grandfather was the richest man in the world. So you're on the board with those guys, and they're used to, when they say things, it being true, just because they said it. And you have to, at a certain point, break ranks, particularly because you know more about your ethnic group and what people have gone through than they do. And you have to find a way of saying it. And you have to find a way of saying it in the board meeting that's meaningful. Or you don't say it. And I talk to a lot of board meeting members. I go to a lot of board events. And I happen to know that many, many, many board members of color never open their mouths and say anything that has anything to do with race or ethnicity. It's just, look, you are getting a paycheck. B, there are terms. You could get, voted out. Thirdly, it's not going to be popular. Fourthly, it probably will be misunderstood, if understood at all. And fifthly, someone's going to take you aside and say, maybe you shouldn't have said that, right? But the fact of the matter is that the only way for us to get to where we are trying to get to is if we do those brave things. Now, when you are African American and you become part of a top board, you get a call from Vernon Jordan. We all do. So Vernon Jordan's a famous attorney, sort of icon in the African American community. And he tells you a couple of things about being on the board. And one of the things he tells you is that for a year, keep your mouth shut. He says, for a year, learn how the board works. He says, write a letter to the people, tell them you want to be on the board, that you love being on the board. He tells you, go take them out to lunch. He tells you a lot of things. But in the board meeting, he tells you to shut up and learn what's going on. Take a lot of notes. And I took him up on that, which was really a brilliant thing to do. And so when I did say something, they were really ready to hear what I had to say. And it was a very, very important thing that had to do with race. And I felt like I had a really strong feeling about it. And it turned the board. They had voted one way. I made my statement. They changed it. It went the other way. And a lot of people, in the company were helped as a result of it. So I would encourage all of you, because I know that one day, many of you are probably going to be on boards of some ilk. And when you are, and you get that moment, do be brave. And it will be difficult, but it also is, I feel, necessary.
Fernando, what are, if you could think of a story or two of a time when you've served on a board and you really feel that you've affected change by having a different and diverse viewpoint?
I'll go back to the original board that I was recruited to. It's no longer looks, acts, or seems like that anymore. These were all old white men. I accentuate old. No women. I mean, I was an oddity in a number of different ways. So when I said, hey, we need some women on this board, they're looking around like, what? Well, to them, you have to understand, that's one, disruptive, and two, signals to them, wait a minute, zero-sum game. I mean, if a woman comes on, who are they going to replace? You got to be understanding of that. And you got to remind them, we have an obligation. This is a business opportunity. If we look at it that way, it's easier to understand.
Is there any specific story, though, that you can think of that you said, if I wasn't on this board on this day, this wouldn't have happened?
I'm more collegial in those things, but I did make the point about women because it was so glaringly obvious that there were not, and they weren't even thinking in that way. Wouldn't have thought in those terms if I hadn't pressed the point. And by the way, some of our corporate officers, women, but very, very quiet, get in, get out, weren't even thinking about it. We got one. But that was a good start. Now our board has 4. And COO recently was a woman. So that's not too bad.
That's amazing. One of the things we're talking about sports earlier, and you know, they're giving me the sign here. I guess we have 5 minutes. I'm going to turn it over to questions in just a few minutes. But, you know, when we talk about sports being the #1 meritocracy, best players play, but still, when you look at the executive levels of sports, head coaches, presidents of teams, etc., they have the same diversity as corporate America or lack thereof. So this is when you have the most diverse workforce as the NBA or Major League Baseball or college, even college teams. You know, I'm a person that, you know, has hired more coaches for sports teams than probably anybody else in the country. And I can tell you that, you know, Henry Cisneros this morning was talking about the Rooney Rule, where the Rooney Rule makes you in the NFL interview at least one minority candidate in every coaching search, head coaching search that they do. And being a minority myself, the one thing, or new majority, what it means to me is I have to work harder to make sure that I find somebody who's going to be able to compete to win that job. Because I know what I wouldn't want, and what I wouldn't want is somebody to put me into an interview that I had absolutely no chance of winning. So I always make sure that spot always goes to somebody that is going to definitely have a chance to win. And you, like I said, all it is hard work. The reason why sometimes you'll read in a newspaper the same candidate interviews with 3 or 4 NFL teams in the same year, well, that's just lazy. Okay, they pick one candidate and they keep interviewing them. But I know, you know, having a minority search person, I know what I wouldn't want, and I would never want to fly across the country to interview for a job that I had absolutely no chance of. So I make sure it's my #1 dedication to do whatever I can to make sure that I provide candidates who can win. So with that, why don't we open it up for questions, and I think there's a microphone in the room, and feel free to address the panel.
Could I ask you a philosophical question about diversity, if you don't mind? All of us as Americans really have similar biases. And what I don't see in a lot of the diversity conferences is talking about how we deal with the biases we have about each other. I'm wondering how in dealing with, I mean, it's all about getting to the board or getting into the seat of power, which is great. But what happens when we get there? If we get there. What happens in dealing with each other in terms of how I feel as an Asian American toward African Americans or Latinos or Native Americans and vice versa? I spoke in Flushing a few months ago, and I told the audience that 90% of you, it was an Asian American audience, it was actually it was a year ago, Lunar New Year. Thomas DiNapoli had given me an award, and so I got a chance to speak for a couple of minutes. I'm not one of your shy Asians. If I was working for you, I would have been in your office the first day. But and by the way, for your employees, if they come in your office, will you be shocked to the point where you'll think they're being rude, or they're out of place, or they're being out of character? Would that happen, do you think?
I would love it. We try to create a culture which overcomes, you know, your individual culture.
So anybody working for you, remember that. Go to his office on tomorrow. So, I mean, he's giving you the answer. But anyway, the question I have is, so I told the audience, which is primarily Chinese American, actually, I said 90% of you would not be here if not for the Black Civil Rights Movement. Total silence, shock. I said, okay, I used to be a reporter. I couldn't say that before. I'm not reporting now. I can tell you the truth. The truth is 90% of you would not be here because the Voting Rights Act was followed by Hart-Celler Immigration Act, which was not incorporated until June of 1968. And the Chinese Exclusion Act from 1882 that lasted really until 1968, because it was only changed in 1943 to 105. It applied to all Asians in 1924, if not for the Black Civil Rights Movement, which was the Voting Rights Act was signed in 65, and 2 months later, in October of 1965, Hart-Celler Immigration Act was signed, which raised it to 20,000 per country and was not put in effect until June of 1968. So I told the audience, the fact is, 90% of you would not be in this country. 90% of us would not be in the country if not for the Black Civil Rights Movement. None of them knew that, including the young kids, which surprised me because I figured they, according to the Pew Institute, millennials are not racist, not sexist, not homophobic, so we have hope for the future. So my question really to you, if any of you will address this, is in dealing with diversity, what happens to the point where we deal with our own biases toward each other? When I see the Olympics in 2008 and I see the Spanish, I mean it's Spain, doing the, pulling their eyes in the slanted eye thing, and I see another team do that again from Mexico, and then I hear what Asian Americans and Asians say about other ethnicities and how they refer to them, and I hear what Latinos say and vice versa and everything else. I wonder, what do we do for the future for each other in dealing with all of our biases that we have inherited in us as Americans?
Great
Is that bold
question.
enough for you? Or
it's
not?
incredibly bold. Yeah. If you don't mind, I would love to answer one aspect or give a perspective on one piece of your question, which is, once you're in the leadership position or once you're on the board, what happens then, right? So you've gotten the placement, and then how do you ensure success and talk about these biases that exist, particularly in any social interaction, right? So I'm a psychologist by training, I'll tell you that. I very much did a lot of research in diversity issues back as part of my dissertation, and so very much a passion of mine. And what I've seen work when we do our board placements is what we call this board onboarding process. And one piece of that process is making another board member responsible for ensuring the success of the new board member, right? And so sometimes that's finding the oldest, whitest person in the group and making them responsible, and their success sort of hinges on how successful they can mentor and onboard that new board member. And so it's addressing it from a slightly different perspective. At least that's what we've seen work for Ferguson.
I think that your question is brilliant, and I'd like to take a little bit of a stab at it. Having a really, really, really diverse company is one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. It's hard every single day. And people clash for all kinds of reasons. And when it gets to my office, I always solve it the same way. And it's always difficult because I have one leader come in and another department head, and they decide that I have to fire one of them. And that's the way they come in. You've got to fire them. So I bring the other person in, much to their chagrin. And I say, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you why I hired this person. I'm going to tell you why I hired this person. And then they, because they're already, really ready to do what they're going to do. I said, and then I'm going to tell either one of you, if you can't accept that, I don't need either one of you, right? So ultimately, it comes down to leadership. If you get to where you're talking about and you get to the board, there are going to be biases. There are going to be biases everywhere, right? But the fact of the matter is that it's incumbent upon that lead director or that CEO or that person that's in the room to know that they know that they know that they need diversity. And then they moderate it. Because if they waver in their desire, it won't work in any way, shape, or form.
Anything else? Any other questions?
There is little that I could add to that very brilliant and pithy response, because it is all about commitment and recognition and willingness to do this. Look, I heard a story of diversity in an earlier panel. Young guy grows up in an all-black city, moves to an all-Jewish city, and what happens? I grew up in the South Bronx. I went to the newsstand to get my father the paper. The paper was in Italian, Yiddish, Spanish, Irish. It was all over. I was very lucky. New York isn't that way anymore. Most of America really isn't that way anymore. We got to work at this. Everybody's got to work at this. So for some, it came easily because that's where you were born and that's, you know, you understood that. And there were still tensions. Today, you know, it really is a very tough situation. And if we're not committed to it, we don't work at it, as you suggested. And in that brilliant answer, we lose some real good opportunities.
Microphones here. We got a couple questions.
Hi, I am Abayne Shasrat from Nation to Nation Working. I am an Ethiopian by birth. My question is, I do sit in many boards, usually international. The challenging part of that sitting on that board is, to me, when they know they are using your ideas, when they know you're bringing the whole lucrative, intelligent ideas, they take it away from you. We call it intellectual stealing or property stealing. And they do it blindly, especially the Anglo-Saxon, honestly, the Caucasians. And when they package it to their own ways, when you try to fight, hey, you know, I am the one who's sponsoring this, I'm the one bringing the ideas. For me, I'm okay, but I don't know how to galvanize and help my community. You know, the rising stars, the most intelligent Ethiopian young one, very successful, but cannot handle the boardroom. Because once you are from certain ethnic or certain country, you're not supposed to be intelligent. So how do you handle that? How can you regain that?
Larry?
I absolutely positively feel your pain. And, you know, and as you go down from country to country to country, there's so little sensitivity. You know, for instance, I work a lot in the Washington, D.C. Area, where there's a lot of Etrians that people want to call Ethiopians. And when they say, I'm not Ethiopian and I'm Etrian, they say, oh, it's the same, you guys look alike. You know, the fact of the matter is that the biases just become almost throwaways, you know, with certain ethnic groups. And it harkens back to, you know, to what our MTA head was saying. And that is that we have a lot of work to do. And to the degree that we're, especially in this administration, where we're starting to block off and you know, just have hard lines, and you know, I look at Fox and you look at you know, at NBC or CNN. You know, I live here and you live there. It's becoming more and more difficult because remember, when we look at like apartheid, for instance, you know, the white population was very, 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 very much the minority. They just had all the money, you know, and all the power. And when those things happen, then it could get violent very, very quickly. And I think in our country, you know, our diversity is our strength. And we say it in our communities all the time. Our diversity is our strength. But everyone has to believe that, you know, for it to ultimately work.
Another question over here. I think last one.
Lady in the red.
Hi, my name is Rucha. I'm here from Flexboard, and it was great listening to all of you about the qualities of a board member. And Larry, I identify with you when you said you were born to be on the board, because that's how I feel, because I was very lucky to grow up in a family that, since I was a child, told me I could be president. And that's how I was raised, and so it was tremendous as a child to grow up with that, especially being a woman and being Indian. But then I entered the corporate workforce, and I realized from the journey of being an idealist beginner to the time I get to a boardroom and become a board member, there is that journey in between, which makes you question the very qualities you're told are good in a CEO or in a board member can be held against you, particularly if you are a woman and if you are from a minority, and that journey becomes difficult. And I can think of 3 things that come to my mind that would help illustrate the point. One is, as a female manager from that level to manager director, their difficulty is how female managers are perceived versus male managers, that inherent bias that the gentleman was talking about, and that makes your journey that much more difficult to get up to the top. The second is just the inherent differences between a man and a woman, and changing the definition of leadership to include vulnerability and expressiveness, which is inherently more in women and perceived as perhaps a weakness even by those superior to you. So when you express yourself, you're given advice instead of, sometimes you really don't need advice. I think women just vent, and that doesn't take away from your leadership qualities. And the third thing I was thinking about in general, and sorry, I made a note, is female leaders that are direct, to Amy's point earlier, that are told that they're too sensitive or too direct or too expressive. I think that takes away so much from the journey it's taken that woman to get to the point where she can voice herself. So having all of these things, it's wonderful to have ERGs and groups and diversity in hiring and initiatives, but how do you, as board members, make sure that CEOs and people at the top are not just doing all these initiatives as an awareness or a PR marketing campaign, but are affecting real change that takes place on so many levels, and it's a social issue that we need to incorporate into the business world?
Well, first of all, just really quickly, thank you for that, because it's like finally at the end of the whole session, we get this brilliant question, which really gets to the root of a lot of what's going on. So first, yeah, deserves an applause. The first and quick thing that I'd want to tell you is a word of encouragement. You know, about 15 years ago, I was walking the walls of the halls in Chicago of Leo Burnett, and I saw a young woman. And she was on the phone. She was on 2 phones. She was speaking in English to the people in the room. She was speaking in Spanish to the people on one phone. And she was speaking in German to the people on the other phone, seamlessly in a circle. She was an assistant media planner, making about $13,000 a year. I immediately hired her, brought her to New York. Her name is Shobha Saram. Shobha has already run Deutsche's practice. She's been at 4, she's run Mother, she's run 3 or 4 agencies. She outgrew me in about 5 years, learned everything I could teach her in about 6 weeks, you know, but just brilliant. And so the thing is that you be you do you, right? And you just assume that, you know, that someone's gonna find that, someone's gonna see that, and that the cream will rise to the top. That's what we're all hoping. We're all hoping that even though we know the playing field is not level, that as we work hard, the harder we work, the luckier we get. And so I hope that for you. But the reality of it is that that's why we're all here, because the problem exists. I bet you, you know, a dime to your dollar, that the fact of the matter is that half the people in this room could go on boards immediately and make an impact in companies. But we're all together, to Glenn's point, trying to say let's all work together regardless of our ethnicity, because we're all in the same boat. We're all in the same position where we need each other to propel each other to the place where we deserve to go.
The only other thing I would add to that is, in many ways, don't listen to some of that feedback. If I had listened to much of the same feedback in terms of being too direct, you know, the pitfalls of being vulnerable, I certainly wouldn't be sitting in the seat I am right now, being asked questions with people who are clearly older than me and much more experienced than I am. So don't have the smoke blown right in your face, and don't inhale it too strongly. I think the other piece is, it's not your responsibility necessarily to change, but the people in the decision-making roles, it's their responsibility to understand the incredible value that those qualities bring to a leadership position. And so part of what Ferguson Partners does is around recruitment, but then also I spend the majority of my time coaching executives and coaching emerging leaders. And there have been a number of situations where I've been called in as a coach because guess what? She's a young woman who is of another ethnicity, and nobody else gets the coach, but she gets the coach, right? So you're already sending a really interesting message, I think, from that very, very, sort of optics. And I'll get feedback as part of the 360 process that I do as a coach, where she's too direct, or she gives her opinion too freely, or she wears her heart on her sleeve too much. And that is where it's my responsibility as a coach to help that person understand what strength comes out of that, right? So helping your line managers, helping C-suite, helping senior leaders understand the value that that brings, because if it hasn't been working, it wouldn't have got you where you are today, right? So there is this aspect of, third-party vendors, to the extent that we can be social change agents for you and allies for you, we are.
One thought I have with wearing my recruiter hat is you described kind of the how, and I tend to focus on the what. What did you accomplish? So I would keep my eyes on what are the outputs required for my role that I'm in now. What is success defined in terms of quantitative outputs? I need to get more revenue, lower costs, faster cycle time if I have one of those types of roles. But what are those quantifiable outputs, and crush those? As you crush those, opportunities present themselves either in your current organization or outside. The how would sort itself out because you'll have to get in an organization that appreciates your how. But the what is also very, very important. Keep your eye on the what. What is it that I need to do in my role that's quantitatively summarized at the end of a period of time?
Well, with that, thanks very much, everybody. I know we're looking at a room full of future C-level executives and future board members, and we look forward to meeting with you at the end of our panel here and at the cocktail hour after that. So please feel free to walk up to anybody on the stage and introduce yourself, because we'd really like to meet you and the talented individuals in this room. Thank you, John Wong, for having us. We appreciate it, and thank you.